Whenever you want.
All right.
This is on my stack, right?
Special meeting to order. First item on the agenda is approval. First item is roll call. All members are present and accounted for. Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. I will entertain a motion to amend the agenda.
To include.
Second.
No, to amend the agenda.
Okay.
Well, I'll move to amend the agenda.
I
I'm
thought you did.
asking what we're amending onto the agenda.
I'm sorry, I thought you said you were amending it.
I want to move to remove from the agenda the legislation from the agenda for today. There's no way we're going to get to that. But also I'd like to request that with the legislation we get a staff report and a financial impact.
So Alderman Arnett,
Yes.
I want to make sure you understand, not review each individual piece of legislation, but make sure you understand what the purpose of each individual piece is. The staff report and fiscal note we can do, but it's simply going to say, this is part of the FY 2020 proposed budget discussed in the budget book.
That would be fine. I doubt that we're going to get to it, but if we do, that would be nice. But
I would suggest you do it first, so you know how the ordinances interact with the budget you're about to review.
Which is the first ID,
Pardon?
actually.
Is this ID operating budget? Is that what we're talking?
yeah.
Those fall under that.
First item is the minutes, then reviewing the projection, and then debt affordability and capital, then get into capital review. But if there's a desire on the part of the committee to change the order, now is the time to do that.
Well, my question for you is, are you talking about taking legislation off of this agenda for today?
Yes, that's what I was talking. That's what I was talking about. City manager is suggesting that might not be the right way to do it. I certainly would welcome a walkthrough through the legislation, but then I think we need to advise staff of that, because I think we have a lot of people here to go through the capital portion of the budget, and before we do that, we have the operating projection, the debt affordability, before we get to the CIP review. And we have 2 hours.
Is your intent to take a position on the charter amendments and the ordinances individually?
No, not. I mean, when we get to those, of course.
Well, that's what I mean. Whenever.
But what
in
I
the
was
process.
asking for is the amount of time, but also it would be helpful to get a staff report and a fiscal impact.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason for wanting to see the fiscal impact is some of these things may have no fiscal impact, and that gives me a sense of how urgent it is that we get to that.
Okay.
They can be pushed further back if we're indifferent about the fiscal impact of the reorganization. That makes it less urgent, given we have 4 weeks to be done, including the report, and we also are going to have some absences, which is going to make things more complicated. So I was looking for ways to make things more efficient.
Well, if we already know we're not going to get to the legislation, I don't think we should keep staff sitting here with the expectation that maybe.
I think most of the staff here are here for the CIP, but we can take a poll. I'm pretty sure.
Who's not here for the CIP? So
Okay.
3 out of the 5 are not here
Right.
for the
All right.
CIP. That would all be fine.
Alderman Arnett, my intent wasn't for you all to take a position on the legislation today. It was to simply explain what each one does, because as you review the department budgets, you're going to see that. So the fiscal impact is clearly disclosed in the budget book as we hit each department. For example, there is a reorganization charter amendment to create an Office of Emergency Management. When you get to the budget book, you will see the Office of Emergency Management. and we
Yes.
will walk through the changes that the legislation enacts. So I simply wanted to say, this charter amendment does this, this ordinance does that. And then I wanted to explain how the budget ordinance works, because you all have never seen a budget ordinance like this one.
You're absolutely correct.
And I want to explain the sections of the budget ordinance so you know what you're reading. Not, all of these tie into the budget. I presume you will take a position on them as you evaluate the budget. So for example, if you say no, we think emergency management should be part of the fire department, we propose an amendment to put it back in the fire department, then that's taking a position on the legislation that creates a separate Department of Emergency Management.
Or does not.
Or does not. Does that make sense? That is taking
Yes.
a position on the legislation.
Right. Yes.
By way of the positions you take on the budget.
So, I'm a little confused at this point, but is it the intent or the sense of the committee that we will keep legislation on the agenda until such time as we can get to it? Or are we going to get a general overview of the legislation today, and then it'll come back when we schedule it at the appropriate time?
This seems to be like we're duplicating our efforts. If we're going to deal with the legislation, I say we deal with it. If we're not going to have time, then let's put it on the agenda for when we do have time. But to talk about it today and then come back and address it again, to me, is a duplication. I would like to hear about it, make a decision, move on to the next thing.
All right?
That's just one person.
So, Alderman Bayonne?
I feel strongly both ways. No. I don't want to go over this twice, but perhaps, I mean, how do you feel about it?
Well, if we had a staff report and a fiscal impact, and then we can read those, and then when we get to the agenda, we'll have them available to us.
You know,
if there's further explanation.
Alderman Arnett, the staff report and fiscal impact is going to say, go to the budget book.
No, I think it needs to say more than that. So let's just discuss.
You're asking us to duplicate our efforts. Everything is
no.
explained in the budget book.
No, it's not.
Okay.
And so let's just take 01719 for an example, which is the one that troubles me the most. It is moving money, we know not from where, to fill in the apparent shortfalls on page 18 of the budget book. And it does that one by one, but we don't know where that money's coming from in the ordinance, and we don't know why
Okay.
it's coming from that.
That's
So-
one of the reasons I wanted to explain 01719 to you, because as I've said, you've never seen a budget ordinance in this form, number one. And number two, please do not say there is a shortfall. There is not. And that is, it's very frustrating to me to have the Finance Committee describe something as a shortfall that we've explained is not a shortfall. We went over the one-time uses the other day. We're going to give you a very detailed explanation when we get to the Office of Finances, or as we review these things and we give you fund balances. But please stop saying there's a shortfall.
When you see things in parentheses, that is a negative number.
So
I
when you-
understand what 017 is attempting to do. What I'm saying to you is, for me, 017 is not complete legislation. It should be
017
just like a GT. From to, we've got the two part, and we don't have the explanation as to why.
Okay,
And
so
in
a
fact,
budget ordinance, Alderman Arnett, is appropriation authority. Revenues do not belong in a budget ordinance. Revenues are estimates. They are in your budget book. The reason you see negatives, as you well know, is because we are using capital reserve funds to pay for capital projects. We've talked about using, for example, fund balance in the critical area tree fund, because that's the only thing the fund balance may be used for. You could have no appropriation, you could have no negative amount, and you would plant no trees. So we can go over those again. We can give you written detail on that. We can amend that budget page to reflect the written detail. But the annual budget ordinance 01719 is in fact complete. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to review that ordinance with you so you would understand how it works.
So we seem to be going right into discussion. We have the agenda, the approval of the agenda before us. I would ask for a motion to approve or amend the agenda so we can move forward.
I would move to amend the agenda, Mr. Chair,
To
Remove the legislation or keep the legislation?
well, I agree with you that I think we need to get the finance statement and the staff report.
Thank you. So that is the motion. Is there discussion?
So the motion is to remove all legislation from today's agenda.
Correct. And to ask for a staff report and a fiscal impact before we put it back on.
Okay, I will second that motion. And for discussion, if I may.
Please.
These are all pieces of legislation, and we have a process. And that process, if we're gonna, and I guess this is probably the new part of the process for us, but if we're going to create all of this legislation as part of the budget, then we still need to go through the process, which means we do need to see a fiscal impact note. Even if it says, you know, it's accounted for or funded in the budget, we need to know dollar amounts, and I'm not sure that we have those. So if it's the new process that we're using, that's well and good, but we still have a legislative process that requires us to have a fiscal impact note and a staff report to go with everything. So I say that we ask for those things and in detail so that we can know whether to support or not the piece of legislation.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
I think it's important to have that information.
Right.
Plain and simple.
Thank you. All those in favor of the budget, the agenda as amended, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes for the last two meetings, the first of which I was not here, so I would ask whoever chaired the meeting to discuss that.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, and I move to approve, I guess I can do that as the chair, approve the minutes from the previous meeting.
April 3rd.
Second?
April 3rd, I'm sorry.
All in favor, in discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Next agenda item is the minutes from the last regular meeting of the Finance Committee, which was on April 10th.
Mr. Chair, I'll move approval of the minutes from the April 10th meeting.
A second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Now we move to the operating budget projection. And that is yours, Madam Finance Director.
Let's go with this.
All right, so
Where's that on the agenda?
It's on page 24 for the color.
ID 440-19.
Got it. Thank you.
all right, so I'm not operating the revenue projections. All right, so what we have prepared for you today is a schedule that we've handed out, and Alderman Savage, I don't know if you have one of these. No. Are there extra ones? See if there's an extra one up there. All right, so this is a several-page document, and what it looks very similar to the types of tables that you're seeing in the budget book. And it's got the same types of columns, but we've added a couple for you. I'll wait till everybody gets their paperwork.
Thank you.
Go right ahead.
Do you have, we handed this out this morning.
You have it, right?
Yes,
It's there.
got it. Thank you.
All right, so this is a multiple-page document that uses the same columnar presentation as what's in the budget book, but we have shown you the following columns for each of the revenue items. The actual revenue in 18, the original 19 budget, the 19 projected amounts of revenue, and the 20 proposed budget. And then we've given you an increase or a decrease from the FY20 budget compared to the FY19 original budget. And the page, if you flip through the pages, you'll see we have the general fund first. That is the first 3 sheets of paper. And then we go into the other funds, such as the PEG funds, etc. Do you want me to wait, Fred, until you?
What's PEG stand for?
What does PEG stand for? It's the television.
Public education, government,
Yeah.
access channel.
Takia, Fred doesn't
I
have,
don't seem to have that.
yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Can you look under your book?
can I ask a question?
Let's let everybody get on the same
Yeah.
page. Because things were sort of disorganized, could you repeat, please, Madam Finance Director?
Yes.
call
Yeah,
you
I'll be
Jody.
glad to.
Yeah, well, we're all getting caught up,
Yeah.
and then I will entertain the question.
All right, so for the revenue projections today, we've prepared a schedule that looks very similar to what you see in your budget book, but we've changed the columns slightly. We have, for each of the funds and the revenue items, we have the actual from 18, the 19 original budget, the FY19 projected amounts, that's what we estimate we're going to have at the end of this year, and the FY20 proposed budget. And then we've added 2 columns. One is the dollar amount of the increase or decrease if you're comparing the FY20 budget to the FY19 original budget. And then there's a percentage increase or decrease. And as you flip through these pages, you'll see the first 3 relate to the general fund, and then we have the other funds behind that. So we can address these one at a time. I don't know how. I'll walk you through the general fund. The order of the items that you see down the left-hand side are identical to what you have in the budget book for
So,
revenues.
I have a question, but Alderman Savage had a question.
Yes, yes.
I just had a kind of basic question. Can you explain the difference between the original FY19 and the projected? What makes
Okay.
it projected?
We have projected what we believe the actual revenues will be at the end of the year. So that's our projection of where the revenue will actually be. It's not a budget number.
Okay.
It's an actual where we
So
think
just
we're going to be at the end of
As
the year.
things change, it's the differences between what was originally proposed in terms of the budget.
It's not an
And-
amended budget number. It's our projection of where we're going to end up at the end. And one thing, for instance, I would point out to you, when one of the things that we've talked about is the fact that our income taxes are falling short from where we budgeted them, and that's on the second page, and it's in the middle of the page, and you see that the 19 original budget, we had $8 million projected, but now we think we're going to come in at $6,152,000. So, you know, that's what you're seeing there. What the budget says, where we think we're going to end up.
So that's something you're constantly adjusting, projected?
I wouldn't say constantly.
Okay.
We've done it a couple times in the last 2 months.
Okay.
So, as I interpret this, we've substituted adjusted 19 for projected 19?
Well, we haven't, we just thought that we could put all the columns on here.
No.
Yeah, we just thought we'd pare them down to what you would need to see in this circumstance. So that information is still available. It's just we thought we'd be putting too many columns in here, and this is more useful.
So, but there is traditionally been another column, a last column, which is a column for city council approved. So I'm wondering if we're going to have room for all of that.
Well, as you go through the budget process and if you, for some reason, would want to change one of these numbers, none of that impacts the budget legislation.
It will if we change the numbers, and also if we do or don't pass the legislation. All I'm saying is typically when we've had these tables in the past, and remember, we're going through an adjustment, and I hope you have noted all along that I've been very complimentary of the new process. I think it is much better, just like the question we had at the audit committee, where I could flip right to the page and get the answer to Alderman Payon's question. I think this is all very good, but where are we going to be recording, and revenue, usually we don't make changes, but on expenditures, which is the other thing I wanted to ask about, the council has always made changes. And so usually there's a column that has city council approved or amendments or whatever it's called. And so looking at this, I think there needs to be, and particularly, and I want to ask you about revenue, expenditures. Are we going to have the same thing for expenditure?
The expenditure one will be fairly similar, but it may have some different information in there. For instance, on the expenditure side, you may want the adjusted budget shown, as well as the original budget. And then if your purpose is to accumulate what the Finance Committee is going to recommend as far as the different expenditure items, then a column like that would be useful. But we would have to update it as we went and type in numbers, and then that would serve as a source to amend the ordinance 1719 to cross out what we had and substitute a number.
And Alderman Arnett, this is for the purposes of discussing the mayor's proposed budget, which is why you have a FY 2020 proposed column.
Yep.
When we get to the final budget book, that won't say FY 2020 proposed, it will say FY 2020 adopted. It'll be in the final book, this column for 2020 will be whatever the council approves.
Good. And that's the way we've done it. I was just suggesting to you, you're going to have to make more room for this table. I assume we'll have all of this information and then the final approved budget column. So we can go back and trace all the history. The next question I think you've already just answered, but look forward to seeing the the expenditure complementary tables. But in the past, projections has met looking out 3 years or 5 years. It's varied. And that is a good way to anchor us, not only how we moved from recent history to where we are now and then what we're proposing, but how are we going to look in the out years. And the reason that is maybe more critical than ever is in the capital, and I'm only going to talk about what was characterized in the capital, these adjustments in the budget ordinance are talked about as one time only. And so I guess my immediate question is, does that mean that we're going to make these adjustments in 20 and we won't see adjustments like that in the future, or will we?
Are you talking about the fact that we're using some of our accumulated fund balance for one-time purposes? You do that every year. We do it every year.
Okay.
And we're just showing it in a different way. I think it stands out and it shows it, but we're using the accumulated fund balance for direct intentional purposes for what it's meant for.
So thank you for that, because that leads to the next question, which is how long can we continue to use accumulated fund balances
We're
before
not
we
using
run
it
out?
for ongoing expenses. We are using it for one-time purposes, which is what you are supposed to use accumulated fund balance for.
So I'm pretty sure this is what the city manager wanted to talk to us about, but I'm having a hard time understanding. To me, one time is one time, not every time. So I think we need kind of a different descriptor for one time only, because it sounds to me like we've done it every year, and we're going to do it every year in the future, so it isn't one time.
We would do it in the future if, in fact, at the end of 19, we had money that fell to the capital reserve fund.
Right,
We would, in fact, use it,
right,
right? If we don't have that money falling at the end of 19, we have programmed out the capital reserve funds that we have and not beyond that.
right.
So we
But-
aren't using more fund balance than we have. We aren't using recurring revenue. We are using capital reserve fund. So
yes.
recurring revenue is sufficient to cover recurring expenses.
It's the term "one time," when in fact it's all the time, unless we don't have funds to apply to it. So I guess, and that was the thrust of the capital article today is, this is only going to happen once and then it's taken care of.
When we talk about one time, and I'm sure you know this, it's like one time for this project, and then the next year, if we have some excess fund balance, we can use it for this project or this project, and the next year, we use
Right.
it. But if we didn't have that revenue, we don't have to do those projects. It's optional.
Yeah, and this is something that the council dealt with a couple years ago. Basically, we have this whole how things spill down, but in the immediate year right after, you can use that surplus, fund balance, however you want to term it, for immediate application to the next year. And that's
As long
fine.
as those things you're going to use it for are not recurring part of your budget.
Well, see, that's, I guess I need to come to a stronger understanding.
Here's an example. We are using one-time money this year to paint the fireboat. Okay, we have to paint the fireboat. We're proposing to use that.
Right.
We need to paint the fireboat. We're not going to have to paint the fireboat again for 10 or 15 years.
Right.
Okay? But next year, I'm going to have some capital outlay item that's being requested that I'm going to pay cash for
Right.
instead of borrowing.
Right.
Okay? So this year it's the fireboat. Next year, it
Yeah,
could be some other capital outlay item. So it's not that you don't have capital outlay each year. It's that I have money that can be used for a one-time purpose, like painting the fireboat. When I close out the books for 19, I may have one-time money available to use in 2020 or 2021. And in which case, we will come to you, and that fund balance, we will not use to pay salaries. We will not use it for supplies and materials. We will not use it for recurring equipment outlay at the fire department or the police department. It will be used for either a capital project or capital outlay. Or perhaps, I think last year we used it for the Microsoft upgrade. So it'll be used for something that doesn't happen every year, and that is the responsible use of fund balance.
so every one of these items in the ordinance are only one-time items. The PEG is only one time, reforestation.
In the budget ordinance?
Yeah, and also
No.
on
He's
page 18.
looking at the budget book.
Or the budget book or
In
the budget
book.
ordinance?
The budget book. So the ordinance was very clear that the ordinance followed page 18,
spending.
the
The
last, the
spending.
rightmost.
It sets
column.
up a
Appropriation
spending
authority.
Right,
Yeah, that's all the ordinance is supposed to do, set up the spending authority.
right, okay. And this is why the city manager wanted to explain it to us, but I think we need to get on with the rest of the agenda. But so,
Mr. Chair.
then again, projections to me is going out. It's not going back.
So you're saying you would rather see projections not only for 19, but where do we think revenues are going to be in 20 and 21 and 22?
Yeah, in the
And-
past, projections have been taking off of what was essentially an audited 18, an adjusted or projected 19, so that we're where we are in the current year. Certainly, we know police underspent, fire had overtime costs and so forth, so we try to fix 19 as close as possible. Then we have
20.
the budget year,
That-
and then we have 3 or 5, it's varied over time, years out that say, okay, here's 19, here's where we are with 20, and this is what we're looking like in 21, 22, and 23. And those are, in fact, pretty reasonably easy projections to do because we have the 4-year union contract. And nothing's easy.
Yes, I mean, you're saying
But-
easy, and you can project the union contracts because you can project expenditures, but some of the revenue flow is out of our control. Taxes, assessed
No,
values
all
of
that, but
property,
a
that kind of
projection,
thing, so.
the 2020 is a projection. But the budget is first and foremost a political document. It is a working assumption, but we know that 2020 isn't going to look like the 2020 that was proposed by the mayor or the 2020 that was approved by the council. So in that sense, all of it is a projection. But what I was looking for and what we've had in the past is saying, given where we're going and the trends that we have, what do we think is going to look, what do we think the out years are going to look like? Because that gives you some context to bound the current budget year. So we've always had those in the past. Some may have looked at it more than others, and some may not have looked at it at all, but it was something that gives you a context for the budget. It's kind of like saying we're feeling pretty safe with our 2020 budget because when we look out, we see that if we extrapolate the way things are going, the trends both in revenues and expenditures, this is what we're going to look like, and you should be aware that this is what we're going to look like in the near term out years. So that's the two questions I had, which I think you've answered. One is we will get an expenditure projection, which the word projection again is semantics. It is a projection from
Right.
what we have now, but it's not a projection in the sense of going out years. And then that was the other question. Will we, as we have in the past, get an out-year projection for a set of years?
As we have time to prepare one, we'll prepare one.
All right.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Savage.
Thank you. I did have a question on something you mentioned about the fund balance just being used for one-time purposes. Do you have is there a table showing what all the one-time purposes are that it's being utilized for? Or do you have a table that shows, well, that's the first question, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, so we can make that connection for you. We've already talked about redoing that page a little bit so that it shows differently and then putting in notes what each little bit is going to be used for. And for instance, on the one for the general fund, the 1.88, whatever it was, 1.8 million is two factors. One is we're using the capital reserve fund in the capital budget for 1,605,000, and we've got a little bit of PAYGO going to two different projects. So that number is the PAYGO and the capital reserve fund. That's the one I know, and the rest of them.
I'm going to clarify, it's not PAYGO going to the capital budget, it's the capital reserve fund for $1,605,000, and then it's the fireboat, which is in the operating budget for $125,000, and it is the CAD RMS payment for $156,000. The 138, there is $138,000 of PAYGO in the budget, which is from recurring revenue.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah,
but
The
Alderman
smaller
Savage,
projects are from recurring PAYGO.
You asked a good question because I had a thought today in your budget book, page 21, which is the fund balance summary, is blank and may still be blank after today, but looking at the changes in fund balance was the indicator, the canary in the coal mine, back when we had the financial meltdown. It was brought to my attention by the then finance director that our fund balances were being drawn down below the legal requirements and in fact emptied out. And that was the first indication that we hadn't properly budgeted. We were spending a lot more than we had revenues. And so fund balances is one of those critical measures for us as policymakers to see the health of the budget. And so I think we need to get that also as soon as we can.
Would you like to go down that page again? We went down the other day. Would you like to do it again and just, we will give it to you in writing, but would you like us to go over it with you again to set this to rest?
Well, I'd like to see, if you have it in here, a list of those one-time expenses.
It's not in there, but we
also,
could talk to you about it verbally and give you something Wednesday.
I have another question, though. But the other question has to do with the recurring. So do you have a table that shows that the recurring revenue is covering the recurring costs? Because you said that's the case, but...
Yes, so if we go down page 18, we can explain that to you.
Okay.
If you would like us to do that.
And I'll add one thing to something you were just talking about. Once we're done with the projections of expenditures, then I will be giving you the fund balance roll forward that takes our projected revenues, which you have today, our projected expenditures, and where we think fund balance will be at the end of the year, to show you that these uses of fund balance are there.
Right. And, you know, I understand we're going through transitions, we've lost staff, all of those things. I get it, and I know we can be greedy and keep asking for stuff at an unreasonable pace, but that very analysis for me is critically important to see those fund balances.
We can walk you through that in 5 to 10 minutes.
Yep.
Okay, in the past, what would have happened is you would have had zeros in that right column instead of negative numbers, because we would show the use of fund balance as a revenue, and that is an improper presentation. It's not a revenue.
Right.
It's not money I'm getting in next year. It's money I already have.
Right.
So if you would like, we can spend 5 to 10 minutes, go over page 18 verbally, and on Wednesday morning, we will have it in writing for you, if that would be acceptable to you.
Well, may I ask, don't we have at least the other funds on these sheets that you gave us this morning?
Revenues.
Revenues, not
Right.
expenditures.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But this lists revenues and expenditures, but at least we already have half of this information, don't we?
With the permission of the committee, I think what the city manager is suggesting would be very beneficial, and it will also
I'm not objecting to that.
help us understand the ordinance. So I would certainly like to do that. And in fact, what I did was put the ordinance in my budget book next to this. There's the Appendix A and B from the general fund budget, and then there's the legislation from the ordinance.
Do you want to set up all of our books like yours so we're all on the same page?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
And we'd be happy to allow you, wouldn't we?
So we're on page 18?
Yes, on page 18.
Okay.
So on page 18, the first line is general fund. We have projected revenues. These are new monies in 2020 of $80,621,800. Proposed expenditures are $82,507,800. That is the number, Ross, that you will see on page 1, line 43 of the budget ordinance, that we are appropriating $82,507,800, and the details of that are listed in Appendix A. The difference is $1,886,000. The $1,886,000 is $1,605,000 of the capital reserve fund, which is appropriated for a capital project. Katie, do you know off the top of your head which projects that's in?
So for my colleagues, that what the city manager is talking about is Appendix A, and we're in the general fund portion of it, and there are 4 pages that go through by department. You have it, but you probably have it.
I have it, yeah.
Appendix A and
No page number on that.
It's Appendix A to the ordinance. And it shows you in detail, it's in your ordinance, it's not on there. That's so what Teresa's doing is taking us to this parentheses, 1,886,000, and the definition for what makes up that is in this appendix table.
No.
It's page 1.
No.
She only referenced that appendix to show you that the total appropriations for the general fund agree to that total in the ordinance.
Yeah.
That the 1,886 is the difference between the revenues and expenditures.
Right.
It's not back there.
So if you, on the 4th page of Appendix A, all of these come back down to the 82,507,800. I'm sorry, we interrupted you,
Yeah.
Teresa.
I can't find it.
Where is the rest of it?
You're not in Appendix A. It's an appendices that was attached.
Appendix A.
It's-
Oh, well, it's a different Appendix A.
1.5 million.
Did we get this morning? Did you have? It's in one of the piles from this morning. It's the legislation, Fred.
I'm in there.
It's ordinance 17.
No, it's different.
Appendix A.
You're not in 17.
You need to be on ordinance 17.
Man, don't tell me I mixed them up now.
Yeah, so you have.
I haven't, but now I've got,
Appendix A.
Well,
Okay.
that's because you're special.
While they're looking in, can I ask a quick question while they're looking at that? What is PEG? P-E-G?
Thank you for asking that.
Public education government. It's the cable fees that we get that are restricted for capital outlay for our studio.
Right. Thank you, because that was the first text I sent to Teresa is, remind me, what is PEG?
Federal funds for projects, city funds for CDBG
All right.
administration.
So we're back on page 18.
administration.
On page 18,
I thought,
the 1,886,000 is 1.5 million for roadways, 105,000 for standard specifications and construction details. No. General
Two
fund,
capital
the
projects.
first line, page 18 of the budget book. Okay, the 1,886,000 that has been inaccurately described as a shortfall is not a shortfall. It is the appropriation of $1,605,000 from the Capital Reserve Fund, of which 1.5 million is for roadways and 105,000 is for the standard specifications and construction details project.
Isn't as large as the CIP for that. I think that's like 100 some odd thousand.
The FY 2020 appropriation is 105,000.
So roadway maintenance?
General roadways, capital project.
And then the standards is 100 CIP.
125,000 is in the operating budget in the fire department to paint the fireboat. 156,000 is in the police department, and it is the second of our installment payments for the CAD RMS system. You approved the first payment this year, and we have set aside fund balance for that purpose and will appropriate it for the upcoming 3 years as well, to make the payments in years 3, 4, and 5. That totals $1,886,000. Are you ready to move to the PEG line?
Well, aren't the roadways, isn't that a continual expense?
It is a continuing expense that we are using the capital reserve fund in FY 2020 to avoid borrowing.
Okay. So that means there's nothing built into the, there's nothing besides that built into the budget. So for example, what would we do next year if we don't have enough money to move over?
Next year, roadways, so this year, if you go to the capital budget books, which we're not there yet, the roadways this year is funded $1.5 million with bonds and $1.5 million with capital reserve fund. Next year,
What
it's
page
fund,
are you on?
page 20. Next year, it's funded with $2,175,000 of bonds and $825,000 of the capital reserve fund. In the following years, it's all bonds. When we didn't raise
Which
taxes.
one are we on now?
Alderman Savage has
Right.
asked how we're going to pay for roadways in future
Oh,
years, so I
okay.
am showing him
Yeah.
page 20 of the capital budget book.
Yeah, I mean, I know we'll get there, but I thought we talked about having that come out of,
We did, Alderman Savage, but when we
Paygo.
cut recurring revenue last year, when the council made that cut for recurring revenue, they cut PAYGO into the general roadways and sidewalks project and substituted it for bonds. When you cut recurring revenue and you make a cut to recurring PAYGO, unless you're going to raise that recurring revenue, you need to continue that.
but we didn't, what revenue did we cut?
You cut 4 cents off the tax rate.
Well, I
And
know,
when you
but
did
was-
that,
but
the
that was
way,
all, that was an increase in revenue.
it was an increase in
Regardless, we
revenue,
just
but the way...
Decreased the increase.
Okay, that's correct, Alderman Savage, but the increase was used to PAYGO fund roads and sidewalks to the tune of 1.6 million, and when you made that cut in revenue,
Standards.
the offsetting cut you made was to PAYGO for roads and sidewalks. And you didn't decrease the appropriation for roads and sidewalks, you decreased the PAYGO funding source, and you increased bonds. That was the council's action last year.
29,
Okay.
You see the standards, and it's coming from capital reserve of
Do you want to
105.
continue down page 18?
Well, we're learning how to use the new system, so what we did was, after we looked at page 20 that you directed us to for roadways, and we saw the 1.5, then we went to page 29 for the standards, and we see the 105. So where do we find the paint the fire truck? Is that
In the fire department's operating budget?
in the operating budget, not in
Yes,
the
the
capital budget?
CAD RMS is in the police operating budget, and the
Right.
fireboat painting is in the fire department's
Right.
operating budget.
So that's where it would be very helpful. This is enlightening, and it would be very helpful if we could have that kind of walkthrough that would attend the ordinance in the staff report, to break these pieces out. Because now it's starting to fall in place, at least for me. So I appreciate that.
May I ask, so the only two of the lists that you gave us that are in the capital improvement are the roadways and the fireboat? Everything
Now,
else is in operating?
roadways and standard specs are in the capital budget book. The fireboat painting is described on page 82 of your operating book for the fire department. And the CAD RMS is described on page,
But answer my question, I'm looking at roadways, I got that. The 105, which I thought was the fireboat, but maybe it's
no,
not.
No,
the
it's-
fireboat is 125,000.
Okay,
It is in the operating budget,
I'm looking in the capital.
okay?
Okay, page 29,
Okay,
the 105.
right?
That says coming from the reserve, but when you go back to page 20, for roadways, it's bonds, it's not from
Yes,
reserve.
look at the bottom.
Oh, I see, all right, you're right. The
But
bottom.
everything else, other than those two, are
there's two
in
amounts,
the
okay.
operating. I'm just trying to.
There, yes, there are four
There are four
items
in the capital.
that equal the 1,000,008,
Are
6 or
they
7.
two in the capital? and
Two in the capital and
operating?
2 in the operating.
Okay, got it. That's what I was trying to clarify. Thank
Okay.
you. All right.
Do you want to continue?
Please. Yeah, page 18, and then we have to go, yeah,
On,
Alderman Payon, I don't know what to tell you. Instead of watching Tiger Woods, I was doing this on Sunday and trying to crosswalk the legislation with these, and that's why I've already sorted my book out to show that. But I understand your frustration, and I don't know what we do about it. It's a new system. In my personal view, it's a better system. And clearly, in the professional judgment of both the city manager and the finance director, it's appropriate accounting. When we had the audit, the people here this morning, they're saying that we're improving our processes. They gave us credit for that, and they said that over the years we've come up with fewer and fewer problems in the audit. It started with a list of 12, but it's going to take us some time to get used to this.
Yeah,
It's
to
hard.
get used to going to 4 different places to have one relatively simple question answered.
Well,
I mean,
that's proper accounting. And we have to trust the
God, I'm
professionals.
glad I went to law school instead of getting an MBA.
We're glad you did too. So we're back on track, Madam City Manager, on page 18, the PEG.
so in the PEG fund, we're expecting to get $60,000 of new revenue from cable fees in FY 2020. At the end of FY19, we think we're going to have $77,000 on hand in fund balance. That equals the $137,000 that's in the proposed expenditure column. We can only use that money for the restricted purposes for which it's been dictated by the federal government, and it is used for capital outlay related to our studio. It's not a shortfall if I have to appropriate the $77,000 to spend it. If I didn't appropriate it, it would simply sit there, and we would not use it for what we're allowed to use it for.
And in the ordinance, that's on, starts at the bottom of page 1 and carries over to page 2 of the ordinance.
That's correct. On reforestation, we aren't projecting any new revenue. This is critical area reforestation monies. We have $77,800 projected to be on hand at the end of 19, and we are asking for the appropriation authority to spend the critical tree area money we have on hand should we be able to identify critical areas in which we might plant those trees. If we get additional revenue in FY 2020, we could come to you for a supplemental appropriation at that time. Joe, do you want to
I was going
walk
to
through
add,
these?
this fund also has, if we get non-critical area, we call it forest conservation monies, which we don't typically get. If we get other types of contributions like that, goes into this fund, and again, cannot predict that. I cannot project it. So if we do get it in 20, we'll come to you for appropriation authority to be able to spend it.
But, may I?
Yes, please.
I'm still not clear though. So 77,000 for expenditures for reforestation, but we don't have anything identified in terms of project. So if we don't know the money is going to be spent, why is it being listed as an expenditure?
Because you have it sitting in the bank right now, and it's not being spent. So if we don't, you won't be, if you do find a place in 20 to plant trees in the critical area, and then we don't give you legal spending authority in the budget process, you won't be able to plant those trees unless we come back to council again. So for any money that's sitting in fund balance right now, we're going to appropriate it for you, so you have that option.
Okay.
Alderwoman Tierney, you came in late. Are you caught up? Are you caught up to what we're doing? We're confused, but we're trying to get
I think it's
straight.
related to today's article in the paper, perhaps, on the,
Well,
why the negative.
we were going to do this anyway, but
Yeah.
certainly the
Okay,
article, but we're kind of jumping
yeah. I think
between documents.
the way I understand it, these are whole dollars. Yeah. that you have to hold. Yeah.
Mayor, I
Yep.
think part of the confusion for me, and I think for others, we're accustomed to seeing numbers in parentheses as deficits. Okay, that was the whole discussion about the fund balance period. And now this has changed, just the opposite. We have this money sitting in the bank, but it hasn't been appropriated yet. Okay, so that's what we have to keep telling
Yes.
ourselves. This is not a negative, it's just an unused amount of money that
Yes.
already exists.
It already exists, and at the beginning of FY '20, we believe it's going to be there, so we're telling you, that's in the bank, you can spend it next year. And for its intended purposes, that's why it's sitting there.
Right. So a general question, and this takes me back to the days of Mayor Moyer. When we get through with the 2020 budget, there is no planned surplus. We're going to have revenues and expenditures equal each other.
In most of the funds, that is true. However, you will see further down on page 18, some of the enterprise funds are projecting some revenue in excess
You're
of
right.
expenses because they're planning on adding to fund balance.
Right, okay, thank you.
And I would add, in the general fund, you are still maintaining your 15% in unassigned general fund balance. You are still maintaining your 3% in the budget stabilization fund.
Right.
So
You are
those not being
maintaining all
touched.
of your required
Right.
reserves.
So we'll see that when we get the fund balance table.
Yes, you will.
Okay, so part of, I mean, it's a new process, but part of the confusion also is we don't have all the pieces yet. When we get the pieces, I think it's going to start meshing for us. Thank you. So now we're on to sprinkler.
So for sprinkler assistance, homeownership assistance, forfeiture, asset and seizure, community legacy, all of those are fund balances we expect to have on hand at the end of FY19 that may only be used for those purposes and that require appropriation authority in order to use them for those purposes. Okay?
Okay?
On the arts and public places, we propose to transfer $40,000 into the Arts and Public Places Fund from the general fund. So that becomes a general fund expense, it becomes an arts and public places revenue. We then ask for the appropriation authority to spend the $40,000.
So these are new dollars in the mayor's budget for art and public places?
Correct.
Okay.
But the authority for this money is in code. It's a tap on the general fund. And for those following the bouncing ball, that 40,000 shows up on page 4 of the ordinance at the bottom.
On the community development block grant, I'm sorry, the grants fund, we have
Wait,
$45,000.
didn't we skip some?
I just went over sprinkler assistance, home ownership assistance, forfeiture, and community legacy as a group. They are all restricted fund balances being appropriated for their restricted purposes.
Well, can you take a second? This homeowner assistance trust may well have existed always, but it's new to me. What is that?
It's not a new fund. It's been in, it's the fees in lieu of building MPDUs.
Ah, okay. So one of the things that you've done for us with this budget, these other funds were always buried on page 109 of the pro forma. And bringing it forward is why it's, for some of us.
In
it's-
FY18 and prior, these other funds were not budgeted, period. In FY19, we made them their own funds. So this is nothing new in '20. In fact, this happened in the FY19 budget.
Right. All right. But thank you. And then the community legacy.
Before we, may I speak to the homeowners?
Please.
That fund is used, correct me if I'm wrong, to assist Annapolis residents who aren't able to maintain their homes, seniors and,
I have asked Teresa Wellman
Okay, yeah.
to give us a schedule, and she will be here for Planning and Zoning's budget that shows community legacy, home ownership assistance, and CDBG, what the amounts are, what the different uses of the funds are, and how those monies are used.
okay, because I had Takia texting her to ask some questions about the CDBG grants, but you can go, you're on to that now.
It's right there, though.
I know,
I met with her last week. She's already preparing that document to give you the detail on each of the 3 funds that she administers.
Okay, because my question was, CDBG funding is federal funding.
Correct.
So why we have this amount in our budget? And she sent me a response back saying it's admin. And so the question is, traditionally, we take 20% out of those federal funds for administration, and why we're funding it, and maybe it's not enough or whatever. But she can explain that. But that's a high number.
If we receive federal funds, we are still required to appropriate them, or
Oh,
the
yeah.
planning and zoning does not have the authority to spend the federal funds it receives.
Yeah, and I'm not questioning that. It's just the amount that's here. Because if I remember correctly, last year, we only got 300 and some thousand in CDBG grants.
That's one of the reasons I've asked Teresa Wellman for more
Yeah,
detail.
okay.
Or the
But it is, it's
Jody
a
has.
grant, so we're.
Yeah, but this is double what we've been getting for the last
Yep.
few years, so I just want to,
Mhm.
okay.
All right.
Thank you.
So self-insurance?
We talked about this one the other day, where we get from the actuary what our reserves need to be at the end of FY 2020. So we start with where the cash is now accumulated to pay our claims. We project the claims the actuary projects the claims we're going to pay out. He projects what reserves we need at the end of FY 2020, and we put the cash in so that at the end of FY 2020, we have accumulated in cash an amount equal to our self-insurance fund claims reserves per the actuary.
So where does that cash come from?
It comes from the general fund. In the general fund, Office of Finance non-allocated, you have transfer to the self-insurance fund.
So we're putting 1.6 million more into self-insurance.
No, we're putting $2,485,000. And actually that number, we have a correction for that number. It's going to be $2,144,000.
Please don't.
Okay, I'm looking at the last column, and I thought that was,
That's the difference in the cash we're putting in, which is the first column. If we paid out all of our claims in FY 2020, what that means is we've already accumulated $1,599,380
Right.
of cash for the claims we might have to pay out next year. That's what that means. So I take the $1,599,000 I've already accumulated, I put another $2.4 million in, I have enough to pay out what I would be required to pay out next year. If you were to go back, if you go back to last year's budget, which no one seemed to struggle with this last year, you had revenues, you had use of fund balance, total, expenditures, difference, 0. That's all this is.
Right.
It's the same exact thing as last year.
so the 1.6 is money that's sitting there, unallocated at this point. Well, it is allocated because it's the self-insurance fund.
Right.
Correct. It is in the self-insurance
Okay.
fund. It is sitting there waiting to pay claims. And we're adding to it and giving ourselves enough appropriation authority of $4 million if we had to pay all of that out.
Right.
Okay, and that's year-to-date?
Year-to-date.
The 1.6, what's sitting there, year-to-date unused,
That's our projection for the end of the year.
for the end of the year? Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Question
Please.
about that. So, I mean, it just seems counterintuitive to have that 2.4 million to be listed as revenue. You're saying that's being transferred in from elsewhere. That's being transferred from the general fund.
All transfers in are budgeted, as shown as revenues going into the fund that they're going into.
As expenses coming out of the fund they're coming from.
Yeah, they're budgeted on both sides.
Well, that makes sense. I'm having trouble understanding the revenue part of how that's considered revenue.
Well, each fund is a standalone fund.
Yeah.
So you have to show the revenue sources as well as the spending.
So the $82,507,800 of general fund expenditures includes $2,485,000 to go from the general fund to the self-insurance fund. So it's an expense in the general fund, becomes a revenue in the self-insurance fund.
T accounts. Health insurance, nice big number.
No use of fund balance in health insurance. Or
Is
fleet
that-
operations or fleet replacement.
And that's because the employee contributions and the city contributions are equal to what we expect to pay out?
Correct.
Thank you.
Joe, do you want to handle the enterprise funds? I just said that those 4 internal service funds, we weren't using any fund balance. I mean, the 3 of them.
Okay, so the last few funds are the enterprise funds.
Could be, just go back though. So the fleet replacement, this is part of our new where we have the contract with Bank of America and we're replacing.
That is a piece of the activity there. This fund exists to replace our rolling stock, I'll call it. And we are sending $1 million over from the general fund into this fund, and we're also making contributions from some of these enterprise funds, smaller amounts, which totals the $1,077,000 that you see going into that fund.
Right.
And those monies will be used to, in very general terms, pay for equipment. We have entered into a capital lease agreement with Bank of America, and we are using those proceeds to buy vehicles. And this fund will pay the debt service on that capital lease arrangement out of the $1,077,000.
Which fund? The fleet replacement?
Fleet replacement.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. In the enterprise funds, there are 6 of them there, as you see. The water fund, the sewer fund, and the parking fund are all anticipated to have revenues in excess of expenditures. And in the transportation fund, you see the anticipated revenues and proposed expenditures are equal because we have the parking fund budget a transfer over to the transportation fund to make it whole, so that you do have revenues to equal expenditures. Then in both the watershed restoration fund and the refuse fund, they are budgeting, they have expenditures in excess of revenues because they're going to use a lot of that money to fund capital improvements out of the cash that they have sitting in their fund balance.
And we'll know about that before, during this process?
Yes, as we go through the capital improvement program, we can point out where those amounts are.
And Jody, I think some of this is operating for solid waste, at least, and for watershed restoration. So
Some of the expenditures are operating?
in your solid waste fund, your refuse fund, you set the rate and you wanted to keep the rate steady for a number of years, right? And the way you kept that rate steady is you're using fund balance. We are proposing to increase the solid waste rate this year. So when we get to David Gerald's operating budget, Public Works operating budget, we will provide to you the water and sewer rate study, the solid waste rate study, and we'll have information on watershed rates.
Where are we in the contract for solid waste?
We've put it out for bid, and that's one of the reasons that the solid waste, that we're proposing an increase in the solid waste rate.
And the watershed restoration fund, when I was trying to go through the CIP, is something where I'm really confused. But when we get to the CIP, we can talk about it. But we had $1.5 million, which is coming from the restoration fees, I think. And then all of a sudden, in the CIP, when we get there, it drops down to 1.1 million, and I don't understand why it should drop down. In fact, the fees should be going up, but we can get to that.
Well,
But
there's
that
2
one is
pieces to
very
it. There's their
complicated.
operating budget that they do certain activities through, and there's the capital projects. And some of this, your last line on your table there, that $1,169,800, some of that's going to the capital budget to fund some of those projects.
For, I'm talking about the watershed
Yeah.
restoration.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading the
Yeah.
wrong line. 449, yes.
Okay, all right, yeah. All right, so but there's, as Alderman Payon said, we're crosswalking from several different things. and-
They all interrelate.
Right, all right.
Just to make sure you understand this concept. If you are taking money from the general fund to pay-go fund capital, or any fund, to pay-go fund a capital project, that is an operating expense that becomes a capital project fund revenue. Just like I took money from the general fund and put it in the self-insurance fund.
Right. Okay,
Alderman Arnett?
yes.
Hi, I apologize.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I know I'm just
I
catching
keep
up.
looking that way, so, yeah.
Oh, am I in the way? Yeah. I'm just catching up, and I believe that what's on my dais is like a backup, right, of this? Is this?
No.
We haven't gotten that far yet. That's the detailed revenue.
Yeah.
And it's got a column that you didn't see in your budget book.
Oh, okay. You're
It's
not
got a
gonna-
column for what we think 19 is going to be, our projected
Okay.
revenues for 19. And then we gave you some columns that show the increase and decrease when you compare 19 to 20.
Because I was following it for backup as you were going along.
Yes, you will see some of these things do connect in with
Sure.
the totals.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Thank
So it's
God
not the
you're
right
doing
time,
that.
the self-insurance number isn't the same? I was curious, on fiscal year 2020 for
I have
self-insurance.
a correction.
But the self-insurance numbers have to be corrected.
Oh, okay.
I had some things grouped improperly, so you have to correct that.
Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'll save my watershed restoration fund questions for whenever it's appropriate. I do a number of questions about that. The refuse fund,
Thank you.
so when is the last time we increased our fees for that? And Mr. Chair, let me know if I'm asking, going into too much detail, but
So the last time we increased the fees was probably in about 11. Because that was the time when we contracted out the services, and it's been a gradual decline since then. So the high was $420 per resident per year, I think in 11, and it's currently $205.
Right, we've been reducing it because we've had savings
Fund
and
balance.
surplus. Yeah,
surprised
fund
we didn't
balance.
increase it last year with the tax rate.
So we'll probably have to, depending upon how the competitive bid goes, we may have to make adjustments to that fee, but
And Madam City Manager, about that, or Finance Director, 3.8 million for the refuse fund for proposed expenditures in FY 2020. Is that, you said it's high because we're entering negotiations. Is that high because we're anticipating higher costs, or we're just building in a certain amount of?
I believe that we're far enough along in the bidding process to know that the price is going to go up significantly.
That is significant.
So this projects that increased cost of the refuse
That's almost,
collection. Okay.
Oh.
That's almost.
We did that solicitation last year, and we've already awarded the contract. We had to award it well in advance so they could get trucks. In case it was a new successful bidder, and it was, and so.
Oh, it's a new bidder.
So
Oh,
base
okay.
was much higher than our new contractor, but it was awarded, I think in December, maybe, well ahead, so they'd be able to have trucks by July.
Okay. Because that's going to have to be, what, about 80% increase in the fee
Director
then?
Gerald, I think. I'm
So I
sorry.
guess that it looks like it's going to have to be about an 80% increase in the fee to cover the anticipated cost. The current fee brings in 2.1 million. Estimated cost is 3.8 million, if I'm reading this right.
It's a $4.67 per month increase in the fee.
Yeah, overall, I'm just wondering what it is. It's 80% or?
Director Gerald, Alderwoman
It's a
Finley. had question.
2.2% increase.
So, Ms. Sutherland, is that built into the mayor's budget? Okay. And the effective date is July 1?
Yes.
Okay, so we've already accounted for that pretty much in the new budget.
Right, both on the expense side and on the fee side.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay. I'm not clear on that, but, I mean, unless I'm comparing the wrong numbers, but FY19 original budget, 2.1 million for the refuse fund. Proposed FY 2020 is 3.8 million.
Okay, the expenditures might be increasing more than 2.2%. But the cost to the residents, because we have purposely accumulated cash in that fund so that the rates don't go like this. Okay, we're taking the rate
Okay.
from 205 to 261. It's a little bit less than $5 a month per household.
Okay. And where can I find the balance of those funds? You're saying there's money, that we've kept money in that fund.
We're putting that together.
Okay. Thank you.
So now, I think we're finally back to the new tables for the general fund revenue detail, which starts on page 22 of the budget book. And my presumption is these new pages will replace those.
I don't know if we have a proposed budget book. I don't know if you want to replace them, or you could insert them in here, or you could put them in another tab. It expands upon the information that you see on page 22 and 23, and in the following pages where we have the other revenue by funds. It expands on it. It gives you a FY19 projection and the change columns.
Right. And then, and so the column on page 22 original was 2019 adjusted. That is now substitute for 2019 projected. And then we have additional information. And then we go from the general fund on to, with these new numbers, got so much stuff in here.
Yes, after the general fund. The general fund is the first 3 pages of what we handed out. And then you start in with the same information for the PEG fund, the reforestation fund, the sprinkler assistance fund. This goes in the same order as the page 18 summary we were just talking about.
So art in public places is down there. So I'm trying to figure out, colleagues,
All right, so if you want to see how things tie together, if you go to the 3rd page of the comparative summary of revenues.
Right.
Hopefully this works out, because revenues 86. So if you go to the 3rd page of what we handed out today, and you see the FY20 proposed budget
Right.
column, it totals $80,621,800.
Which is what we had
Which is the total that we have on that page 18 schedule for general fund 2020 revenues.
Right.
Would you repeat that? What was the total?
It's the same as on page 18 for
I know,
total
but I'm
revenue.
looking-
$80,621,800.
Got it.
What page are you on?
So, we're going to need numbers on these pages too, but if you,
Well, yeah, I mean, we can put page numbers, but like I say, they weren't intended to displace what's in the budget book. They're additional information that we can give a page number one of 5, or 2 of 5 on each individual handout if you want. Alderman Savage, we were comparing what's on page 18 in totals to the 3rd page of the handout with the detailed revenues, just so I could show you how they tie together.
all right, so we'll each have to figure out where we're going to, how we're going to handle this.
How far your yellow legal pad?
You may.
I just need it.
Here's my pages on the CIP. All right. So, does that move us on now to the debt?
We can, or I don't know, if you want to take some time to look at the detailed revenue and talk about it at
yes,
another
please.
time, or...
No, let's, we might as well know what we're looking at.
The first 3 pages is the general fund revenue, and that's always typically what gets the most interest. It's grouped by,
Still the comparative. We're still on the comparative summary.
Yeah, I was just going to run down the different sources. I mean, there's not much to highlight in the real property taxes. You're going to see from 19 to 20 an increase again. In that, when our assessments went up last year, we take it in over 3 years, so we will be getting a third of that assessment increase. And this budget is built assuming the tax rate stays the same. And then I can't talk to a lot of these specific revenue sources. We've used what's happening in 19 as a source to project 20. We've also talked about, on the second page of the general fund, the income tax. We talked about that earlier. We had actual revenue in 18 of 7.9 million.
Page 2.
Of the handout from today.
Slightly below the middle of
Are
the.
we talking intergovernmental? Is that the section we're on?
Yes, intergovernmental income tax.
Okay.
So I'm kind of, okay, wait a minute, that's different. So 19 dropped more than we thought, but I sure paid a heck of a lot more money in my income tax to the state this year.
Yeah,
So why aren't we thinking 20 will go up again a little?
It might, but I'm not going to build the budget on it yet until we
Okay,
see what's going on.
Yep.
Nobody,
conservative.
even the state is tentative about their increases, and what we built in here, 19 to 20, is what the state said they believe overall income taxes are going to go up. It's a small 2.3 or 3.
And I would suspect that the delegation is going to hear a lot about the fact that many of us were forced into using the federal standard deduction, so we had to use standard at the state, and either the state will need to consider at least raising the state standard deduction more than the $500 they
It's unclear what they're
Or
going to do, if there's going to be a
Some states are allowing
response.
people to do federal one way and state another way.
Right, so I don't want to build anything in, assuming we might have an influx in one year, and then if the state reacts and does something to compensate for Maryland taxpayers, and then it goes back down again. So we want to wait and see. I'm going to be cautious
Right.
with the estimate.
Okay. Anything else on the general fund revenue? Okay.
Again, if you're looking through these outside of the meeting and you have a question on an estimate and how we came up with it, I'll be glad to. I'll be glad to answer your questions. We go to the separate funds, the PEG fund.
Before we go on, I'm looking at the fuel fund. And, well, we know about the pilot, but and it's a small amount of money considerably, but
It is a small amount of money, and when I first set up the budget, I put 0 because we hadn't gotten very much. Since then, we've got like $1,000 in the last couple weeks. So I wouldn't say it's going to be nothing, but I didn't want to change it at that late date because it's only $1,000, $2,000. It's not going to impact the number.
exactly where does that come from, though?
It's from the state on fuel taxes. I don't know.
Okay, so on fuel taxes. Well, we surely use more gas than that.
Yeah, I was
but
gonna
Well, I don't know what piece we get at this
Yeah.
level.
Yeah, it's not fuel taxes we're paying. It's fuel taxes we're receiving.
Right, that's what she was saying.
Yeah, but I'm saying, we all pay
When we
into
go to the gas tank, we...
that as a consumer.
Right.
Yeah. They're generous.
Apparently, we're not getting very much of it. I don't know if
Yeah,
it goes to the
right.
county level or the state is keeping it on.
They're trying to get us onto bicycles.
But you will see, we've had, we are getting more in the highway fees. Those are going up for 20.
23%. Okay, thank you.
Stupid question time. These are based on the assumption that the proposed fee increases are approved. These are based on.
Yes, but I don't know that we had too many changes in our fee structure. I only remember an impact in the parking fund. Teresa, do you want to comment to that?
That would be one, yeah, right, okay.
Yeah, so as we get to those individual funds, we'll talk about fee changes.
Okay.
And you have a fee resolution, you have a fine resolution. We will be, it's not how I wanted to do it this year, but it's where we ended up. We will be proposing amendments to those because we are increasing some fees. Mm-hmm. We are increasing some fines, which are primarily parking. Mm-hmm. But when I sent it to, so every department had to review the fees and the fines that fell under them for fees, their costs related to those services. And then, you know, look to propose fees that would cover their costs in some cases, or in some cases it's the market. For example, we have fees for memberships at Pitt Moyer. It doesn't cover the cost. It's never going to cover the cost. We know that, right? And so we're looking at, well, what is an appropriate family membership, or what is an appropriate full pool membership, that kind of thing. But in public works or planning and zoning, you have fees that are very directly tied to the costs they incur. So they've been asked to look at those. As we did that, we found fees that had code references that were just wrong. So that I asked the departments to go back, clean it up, give me the right code reference. And so we'll be presenting some amendments to the fees and the fines resolutions to correctly reflect those amounts.
But these numbers reflect?
These reflect the revenue from those changes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, it says, you want to join me at 11:50. I don't know whether we can in the middle of this or not.
Sorry. We just got an invitation from the mayor to leave early to walk,
Yeah.
which I think I would like to do. So we're unlikely to get to much of anything on the CIP today, but
Yesterday, not now, but yeah.
all right. So
Did you say you're leaving early?
well, Gavin is leaving at 11:50.
Okay, all right.
So we would like
So
to
you
do-
want me to continue just kind of flipping
Please.
through these
Yeah.
revenues?
So which page are you on now?
Well, I finished looking at the general fund unless anybody has any specific questions on the general
Yeah,
fund.
Mr. Chair, can I a few questions?
Of course.
So on page 3 of the general fund, what are the administrative reimbursements?
So that is the indirect cost that we charge through to the enterprise funds for the administrative services that the general fund provides on the behalf of the enterprise funds. For instance, we have administrative departments, finance, MIT, HR, and other personnel costs that we allocate out to the using departments, and we get revenue back into the general fund from the enterprise funds for that purpose to reimburse us, because some of the administrative costs that we incur are on behalf of those enterprise funds.
Right. But if you'll remember, if you look at 18, when the city manager first got here, she thought we were charging those enterprise funds excessive amounts of money. So we're at a much lower level, and I assume a closer to correct level of charges.
Yeah, it's a very detailed analysis. We'll take all the costs and allocate them in the way we believe they should be allocated in.
Is that broken down anywhere?
As far as what we're allocating where?
Yeah.
I can share my calculation with you. It's a very big Excel spreadsheet if you want to see it.
She's got some calculator tape.
That's right.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't mind sharing it. You can see where the numbers come from and how we have two basic methods of allocating costs. We allocate them based on the number of employees, if we think that's appropriate, or based on the total dollars that department is spending or that fund is spending. So depending on what what the costs are, we would allocate it either by the number of employees or the dollars.
Okay, and that gets pulled from the appropriate fund.
But
Okay.
accounting for it correctly shifts money away from fees in these funds. It should, all other things being equal, to the need for tax revenue in the general fund. So this is I think you have to do it right, but I think it has implications.
Is that what, when I was looking at some of the fund sheets in the budget book, it had listed transfers. Is that what
Yeah,
the transfers are, or could that be different?
let me see if I can find one quickly for you. On Public Works.
It is
okay.
primarily what the transfers are.
Yeah.
In the enterprise funds, when it has transfers out, that's a transfer out to the general fund to pay for those administrative costs, which are a revenue in the general fund.
Right. That's primarily what's in the transfer line. There could be some other things in there depending on the fund as well.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that'd be good to know, because I think, like, for example, when I was looking at the watershed restoration fund, I was wondering what those transfers were.
Okay.
So what about the other miscellaneous category?
Are you asking what that is? I'm not going to be able to
Yeah.
tell you off the top of my head.
Okay.
I'll have to look it up
Okay.
for you because it's what it says. It's other miscellaneous, and there's probably 3 or 4 items in there.
All
Thank
right.
you.
All right, moving on with the revenues in the smaller funds, the PEG fund, if you remember, we are projecting $60,000 coming in this year. I have projected $60,000 of revenues coming in 20, and that's for the PEG fees, the cable fees. So I don't know if we want to go over each one individually.
I think we just kind of touched on all of these when we went over
Yeah.
that
we kinda
page that
went
had
down
the
list.
revenues before. We're just repeating ourselves at this point.
May I ask though, is this Comcast or Verizon?
Both.
Both?
Both.
I just
Okay.
noticed that.
I thought we were getting 60,000 from one.
And they're going down. They're decreasing each
Yeah.
year as fewer people have cable. So we're
Oh, good, the wires can come down.
So on the art and public places, I think I remember discussion, they didn't spend all of their money in the last couple of years, but
Yes, when you look at this year, what they've encumbered and what they've spent, I'm projecting that they're going to deplete what they have in fund balance. So that's why for 20, we put in the revenue that the general fund is going to send to the AIPPC, and I'm giving them appropriation authority to spend it.
so, but I'm not begrudging them that, but it's more than doubling what it had been in the earlier years. We think they will spend it?
So one of the mayor's priority is funding the arts, and yes, we do think they'll spend it. So he has asked me to appropriate additional funding to the arts and public places so that we can expand the initiatives of what they do consistent with his priorities.
And may I add, in the past, and you may recall, it was considerably higher
yeah.
than this amount.
Much higher.
And there's still a concern about Westgate Circle and the ability to put new artwork there, and, I mean, so it's not that they can't spend their money.
Right, and 10,000 of this is for a
Maintenance.
RFP process related to Westgate Circle.
Per code, they submitted a budget, and it actually exceeds this a little bit.
Right.
So they
No.
do plan on this expenditure.
No, and I'm sure, as with the rest of you, they came and talked to me and made their case. I think they wanted to have a piggyback on construction fees, or no, Airbnb, and I said I would stay away from that and stick with what you have, because you have a significant appraisal. They could get a lot more than this according to the size of the tap. So, yeah. All right. Self-insurance we talked about. Health insurance we talked about. Fleet operations we talked about. Fleet replacement.
We talked about replacement. We hadn't yet talked about operations.
Okay,
We briefed over it when we were on page 18, going down the list.
Right.
That's the fleet operations where they're maintaining and fueling the automobiles and the other equipment.
all right, and then, water fund, sewer fund, parking fund, anything we should pay attention to there?
No, just that we talked about changes in revenue. You will see that the parking fund has an increase in their parking charges,
Yep.
which is in line with some of the fines that they're charging.
Okay,
And we talked about refuse and the new contract and the increased costs to residents.
Mr. Chair,
Meager
Mr. Chair,
increased costs.
certainly, yes.
just a quick question on the watershed restoration fund. What's that increase of 160,000 attributed from or to?
So let me see, let me get on the same page here.
Last
That's
page,
a-
I think.
That's an increase from the 1.5, which was the amount that is coming from the fees, I believe.
So to project the 20 proposed budget, I looked at the actual, where I think actual is coming out, and the fee is going up 2%
Okay.
on top of that.
Okay.
But is it 2% off of the 1.5? It must be something, 2% off of something higher than the 1.5.
It's 2% off the current rate that's in the fee schedule. So the new
Okay.
fee schedule will have a 2% increase on the rate. And when we take projected revenues and we put a 2% in, that's what we get.
Okay, so that would be 2% on top of the 1.580?
Yeah, so the old, actually,
I think it's bigger than 2%.
it's a little bit bigger.
I'm
and it's-
happy. I want it.
Yeah, this is we're going to take another look at it.
We need to take another look at this one.
Yeah.
When I initially did it, I made the increase too high, but I think it's not too far off what we're actually going to get next year based on actual revenues that are coming in.
All right. Well, we
You're
need
saying
it.
without an increase in the fee, you expect revenues might be going up?
With a
I'm sorry.
2% increase.
All right. Can we save debt capacity? Because I need some time to talk to the committee and colleagues before we run off to this march. I think we're digging in. I hope that we're getting to a better understanding, but we ain't going to have enough time. And some of the things, I think we need to sort of decide what are things that we're doing we're doing essentially as accountants, doubling up on the work done by the finance department, and what are the things that are policy sorts of things that we should be looking at, which to me, that's staff increases, staff decreases, changes in mission. I really would like to, because we've put it into the budget this year, after many, many years of it being missing. I think we should look at the performance measures, those sorts of things. So I'd like to, maybe we can do it by text or something. I think the Finance Committee has got to refocus to things that are more in our bailiwick, our wheelhouse, rather than T accounts. I do trust what the 2 minutes. Okay, so I would encourage us to have some chatter back and forth, and it's also we're taking up an incredible amount of time from the finance director, walking us through Accounting 101. So I think we need to think about what we're going to be able to do. We've got to get a report to the rest of the council. And by the way, any council member who comes here is a plus, because that means fewer people we have to bring up to speed like we did to ourselves today. But I think we need to start rethinking what our mission is and what we can possibly get done during the few weeks we have left to us. So, I would encourage.
So what is your recommendation that we do differently?
Well, so like I did 9 pages of stuff on the CIP.
Okay, let me ask that question again. What is your recommendation in 60 seconds or less?
I think we need to look at big items, like for me on the CIP, I can't figure out where the capital budget is for 2020.
So would you like to start with the CIP, since that's a big thing and most other things are fixed in the operating?
I think CIP and the reorganization are where more the action is. The accounting for the actual budget, there are some budget increases, so I would encourage everybody to go through department by department. I saw some big increases for some of the departments. So I think what we need to do, I believe, is refocus to hit the big picture and to hit the things that have more policy import to it than accounting import.
Okay, I'm good. I'm just asking. You know, I thought we had said we were going to start with the CIP because it is the most fluid document.
We're coming. So
I don't think they're gonna
maybe
wait.
everybody can take a time out between now and the next Finance Committee meeting to come back with what you think are the really big issues that we should take up. And then we can let the finance director and the city manager and Katie, who hasn't said a word today.
I do encourage you guys, if you want to send questions to me prior so we can just rifle through them, please do.
Yeah, because we got to work smart. We just don't have a lot of time, and we have less time than we think we have. So, and Rob and Ellie, if you want to do that same thing, that would be very helpful.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I move that you have given us our instructions and that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
I'm leaving my stuff
Thank you,
here.
Jody, and